The Power Factor Show with Steve and Rick. Episode 19, Gun Modifications.
Gun Rights Radio Network has the best pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights podcast available on the net. The podcasts are absolutely free when subscribing using iTunes or Zune Marketplace. Or if you want, you can just listen from the website. Make sure you visit gunrightsradio.com to subscribe. Podcasting freedom, one episode at a time.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Power Factor. I'm Rick.
And he's Steve. So what are we going to
So today we're going to talk about modifications to our guns. So this is the secrets of the master, so to speak, about what we've done to our guns, why we've done it, and the advantage that we've gained from it to a certain degree. So you want to start with what you're shooting?
Well, okay. I'll start with this gun. This is the gun that I shot in limited 10 competition for 5 or 6 years, and it is it's based on components. It's built up from components. It was never a complete gun until Gunsmith put it together, but it embodies most of the enhancements that you will find, especially in limited division. Modifications to the 1911 platform.
Limited 10 division.
Limited 10 division and limited. Yeah, I mean, this could be shot in limited.
True.
And
you have?
And I have, exactly. But if you look at the state of the 1911 art today, you can buy an over-the-counter gun that has essentially all of the bells and whistles that even 10 or 15 years ago were custom options. This gun, if you look at just the kind of the basic features of it, adjustable sights, a fully adjustable rear sight, fiber optic front sight, it's got the bushless bull barrel, lightning, ventilating holes in the slide. These are just to reduce weight. I mean, they're done in kind of a stylish way, but you could just as easily mill out a like amount of material from the inside of the slide and it wouldn't be visible. This is just to reduce the weight of the slide so it weighs about the same as a standard 5-inch slide. We've got a ventilated commander-style hammer, ambidextrous thumb safety, beaver tail grip safety. I prefer an arched mainspring housing. One of the things you'll find is that today probably 90% or more of the 1911 models sold have a flat mainspring housing. This is consistent with the original 1911 design.
Sometimes made of plastic.
Yeah, the original 1911, it was adopted by the military, had the flat housing, and then in the 1920s, the military said, well, you know, the gun would actually fit more people if it was arched, but in the last 20 years or so, apparently more people have changed their mind, and they like a flat one. I prefer the arched. A lot of top shooters prefer the arched, but you would never know it because you just don't see many guns equipped with it. The Magwell funnel is something that is just kind of universal in competition now. This is actually the Caspian race-ready frame that has the Magwell funnel molded right into it. So it's not a separate part. It's actually part of the frame casting. It also has front strap checkering, just essentially the encyclopedia of 1911 modifications that on this gun really were modified. I mean, this was just kind of a box of parts, and a lot of the stuff was done to it to get it in this configuration, but it's not really much different from Steve's limited gun, which is mostly over-the-counter in terms of the features. It's had some stuff done to make you happy, but that gun is essentially, you can buy it over-the-counter pretty much in that configuration.
To a certain degree, however, I have done quite a few modifications of this.
Why don't you tell us about them?
Well, take notes, because here we go. This is a STI Edge. I've had it hard chromed. I'm a real big fan of hard chrome. This hard chrome was done by Virgil Tripp literally probably about a week or two before he quit actually hard chroming guns. I think Tripp actually did some of the best hard chroming, and actually all of my guns that I've had for competition have been hard chromed by Virgil. He did a great job, but at any rate,
doesn't do it anymore.
Doesn't do it anymore. So,
my gun, on the other hand,
who did you have your hard chroming done
This was
by?
done by Metalloy, and they've been in business for 20 or 30 years. They're actually in the same neck of the woods, I think, as Wilson Combat and Nighthawk Custom down in Arkansas. And they did a good job, too. This gun is all mostly chrome moly steel that's then been hard chromed. It was done about, I think, 2004, and this gun's got probably 20,000 rounds through it, and really there's no
Yeah.
wear, evidence of any kind of wear on it, the surfaces of it anywhere. I mean, it looks still like it did when I got it back.
And that's the beauty of hard chrome, is that there's a lot of finishes that are out there that are trying to mimic hard chrome. You'll hear like it's just as hard as hard chrome,
Harder than hard.
harder, and yet I don't think they are. I'm not sure what the Rockwell numbers are, the exact Rockwell numbers, but I think they're around 68 to 70 or so in terms of Rockwell hardness, which is some of the hardest stuff out there. Hard chrome lasts and it wears. This gun here probably has about 20,000 rounds on it, and it looks as if it was new. I mean, there's not a mark on it
Of
anywhere.
course, you clean it all the time.
That's true. I do clean it. So you got me on that. But at any rate, and we've been there and we've done that. But I'm a real big believer in hard chrome. Now, some people don't like the shiny gun and everything, and if they want to go to something darker, there are other options out there. But in my mind, I don't care if it's shiny or not. And hard chrome wears extremely well. Never had any issues with it. So sights. Oh boy, that's a good one. Dawson fiber optic front sight, running a .090 front sight. I have the STI Bomar style rear sight. I've increased the width of the notch to .122 and increased the depth of the notch to be exactly flat with the bottom of the sight base, so that when I'm looking through the rear sight, I'm seeing the very bottom of the front sight. In other words, I'm seeing the exact or the entire height of the front sight. There is nothing worse than having a rear sight that is cut such that you only see, say, 3/4 or a half or whatever the front sight. So when I'm looking through and I have a perfect sight picture, when I'm looking through, I see the very bottom of the front sight and nothing more than that. I really believe it's a big benefit in terms of speeding up front sight acquisition and also better refining the front sight. I'm also really particular about making sure that my rear sight is perfectly cut square when I do that. When I lowered the rear sight, I made sure that it's a very, very square, basically in the corners here. Again, I like the Bomar style flat black serrated rear sight. I would actually prefer that the corners in this were the square, sharp corners that they have traditionally in the Bomars, but they knocked them. The STIs, they've kind of knocked the edges off to reduce or decrease the amount of snagging on my my Springfield custom gun that I had. I had, honest to God, Bomars on it, and it was a very sharp rear sight, and it looked like a billboard when you were looking at it. I mean, it was a perfect sight picture. In terms of other modifications, I've got a cylinder and slide fire components kit here, so I have a extremely lightened hammer, basically designed to decrease lock time. However, I wouldn't know it. But at any rate, it's very skeletonized. I have, again, the cylinder and slide sear and disconnector assembly in here. I'm using a 15-pound mainspring, very light.
Does the gun always go off when you use that 15
When I use the right primers, it will. If you're using Wolf primers, they're crap and they don't go off. You can take it from me on that one. But it will go off with CCI, Federal, and Winchester.
All the primers you couldn't get about a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm using a EGW flat steel mainspring housing just because I like it. Adds a little bit of weight to the back of the gun and kind of balances a little bit better. Normally they come with a plastic mainspring. Magwell is a Dawson Ice Magwell. The really nice thing about this is that it has, which I need a screwdriver to do this, but it has removable inserts here. So this black piece, you can, after doing lots and lots and lots of reloads, if you miss and you chew it up after whatever amount of time or whatever, you can pop that out and replace it. And makes up your nice speedy reloads, nice big wide bag base. The other thing that I've done here, which you can't really see, but the standard STI magazine well here, actually, you can see here that I've relieved it around the base to smooth or be a contoured fit with the mag well. Normally there's a little lip there, so I took a Dremel and basically beveled that edge to facilitate doing reloads. In terms of other modifications, I have done the trigger job or trigger work on this. Breaks at about 2 pounds, give or take. And other mods I'm using, let's pop the front end or the top end off here real quick. It says knowingly. ISMI recoil springs, which I'm a big fan of. You can basically replace an ISMI spring once, and it's pretty much good for the life. Well, it's not really good for the life of the gun, but it's good for a very long time, as opposed to some other springs that are out there. And I'm running a CP shock buff, which a lot of people have disparaging remarks about shock buffs. I don't run a shock buff to protect the frame, as a lot of people think they're used for. I use a shock buff to really affect the way the gun feels in recoil. Now, shock buffs...
You're not going to go into that impact diversion
Yes,
propagation thing
yes,
again,
I
are
am,
ya?
but even something more from a layman's term that you
Oh,
probably can understand
Okay,
a little better.
good,
Right?
good. All right.
But the physics side of it is that a shock buff reduces what's called the impulse force, and impulse force is basically force over a given time. The force is the same no matter what you do, whether the shock buff's in there or not. But spreading the decay of the acceleration to slide out as it basically goes in recoil is what we're looking for. The analogy of this is that versus, let's say, getting punched versus getting pushed. Okay, so if I'm using the same amount of force to push you versus punch you, which one's going to effectively impact you less? Which one's going to hurt less?
Well, I guess getting pushed would hurt less.
Right. And that's what a shock buff does, is it effectively turns the force, what would normally be a punch, without it, as a very rapid decay. And all what it actually is that the slide is accelerating and then all of a sudden stops, and that's the force. Okay, your force is F equals ma, mass
Are
times
you
acceleration.
are you going to conserve that force?
It actually is conserved. So at any rate,
Got it
so
in my pocket.
yeah, it's not going anywhere. So at any rate, that's what happens, is that you end up with a force that's being basically over a given amount of time. The shock buff basically decays that time and reduces the impulse to you, and it's the equivalent of being pushed versus being punched. And that's really what a shock buff does.
Now, if the slide were not moving as fast when it hit the frame abutment,
Sure.
would the effect be similar in that you wouldn't have so much force? You would, in a sense, rather than dissipating the force with the shock buff, you would just reduce the force that's being applied to the
You would
frame.
reduce the force, but you would reduce the force because, yes, if the slide is not moving as fast, then it means the acceleration is not as much, deceleration, I should say, and there is a given force. But the shock buff basically takes that force that you have and spreads it out over time. So, yes, the effect would probably be similar but not exact of using a shock buff.
Okay.
If
Would
that answers your question.
Well, yeah. I'm an advocate of reducing the impact velocity of the slide rather than trying to kind of attenuate that impact with the shock buff.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. What is the velocity of the slide controlled by?
In this case, it's you're limiting the amount that the slide is accelerated by reducing the mechanical advantage that the slide has over the hammer by removing or reducing the radius on the heel of the slide
And that's
stop.
one way you can affect it, right?
Yeah.
But once it gets going and the slide is at velocity, which is pretty much controlled by the ammunition of what force it exerts on the slide, at that point your slide is at velocity. So I see where you're going with this. Is what Rick's pointing out here is that during the initial firing of the gun, if you have a fairly sharp, and that's another way to affect recoil, is a fairly sharp angle or radius on your firing pin stop, then the effect of the shooter, basically the more energy is transferred to you by doing that, correct?
Well, the way I in layman's terms, the way I look at it is you've got the mainspring doing more of the work that would otherwise be done by the recoil spring, because the slide is essentially transferring that energy to the mainspring in overcoming the greater resistance that the hammer's providing.
Right.
So you can essentially reduce your slide speed, I don't know about the acceleration, but your slide velocity, I think, is reduced by absorbing some of that recoil energy with the mainspring rather than loading it into the slide and then trying to stop it. Or
To a certain
dissipate
degree,
it
yeah.
with the-
Right, because if
with
you have if the slide velocity would be decreased by the fact of that you're transferring a lot of the energy to you during the initial recoil pulse, and that would agree on it. And the other thing I think also you can look at in terms of tuning recoil is the recoil spring and the mainspring also will affect the felt recoil. And again, it gets into felt recoil is what we're really looking at here.
Well, and
recoil's a fixed. I mean, you can't.
Well, but it's also very subjective.
True.
You can very
Right.
much change the character of the recoil,
Mhm.
even if you can't change the amount of recoil.
And that's what the shock buff effectively does, is it changes the character of the recoil. I can't change the recoil. I can't change the force itself.
Using this ammo of the same power.
Right. I mean, assuming the constant of the ammo being the same power, I can't change that, but I can change the way it feels, and that's done a lot by tuning in terms of the recoil spring and the mainspring. So in terms of that, I have a fairly light mainspring and I have a fairly light recoil spring, which lets the slide basically get moving fairly quick. It's not, I mean, if these were really stiff, it would dump a lot more energy back into me as opposed to dumping it into the gun. So as a consequence, the slide, at least in my mind, will cycle fairly quick as opposed to being tighter sprung. Now, the other advantage of a light recoil spring is not so much part of it is the initial recoil pulse, but when the slide comes forward with a lighter recoil spring, the slide is not basically being driven as hard forward as it would with a heavier spring, and the gun won't dip as the slide goes back into battery. So that's another advantage of running a light spring. So you hear people all the time, it's like, oh, I'm going to put a lot heavier spring in, like in a standard 1911, it's like 16 pounds, and they'll put in 18 pounds because somebody told them they should do that. In reality, they should probably be going the other direction, maybe a 14-pound or whatever, to affect their...
But I know guys that are running 10-pound and 11-pound springs in their single-stack 45 shooting major, and I think it's doing nasty things to the gun, but the gun will, essentially, the lighter the spring, the flatter the gun shoots. I mean, that's kind of the effect you get. You'll have people say, oh boy, I like that soft recoil of the heavy spring, but I liken it to like a pogo stick. You've got this, you're compressing this heavy spring in recoil, and then it's slamming the slide down as it comes back into battery. And so you've got the gun kind of going like this with the heavy spring. The light spring, there's still the same amount of recoil energy,
Right.
but the gun tends to track flatter.
Stay flatter.
Yeah, and you have to balance that with your power factor. For instance, I'm using a 14-pound spring in my 45s. I'm using an 11-pound spring in my 38 Super that's loaded to minor.
This is a 12-pound spring here in 40.
Yeah, and some people, they just pick the spring strictly on how it feels. I mean, they'll shoot like a bill drill and say, change the spring, and they'll look at the size of the group and how quick they shot it, how it felt, and they're strictly looking at the way the gun is running, as opposed to some sense of, well, I don't want to batter the frame, or I don't want, there's mechanical issues, the gun isn't cycling properly. I mean, there's all kinds of things, but if the gun is working and you can tune it via the spring rates, that's good. You can make the gun kind of perform the way you want it to and feel the way you want it to.
One comment I've heard about in terms of tuning springs that people will use is they'll do a bill drill at 6 or 7 yards, table 7 yards, and you, depending on where your second round goes, is kind of what indicates what your spring is doing. So your first round, let's say, is wherever it's at, and if your second round is high, it may indicate that your spring is too light because
it's not coming down.
Right,
enough.
it's not coming down. But in the second round, if it's low, it basically indicates that the slide or the gun is being driven down. You're literally driving the nose of the gun down because of a really heavy spring. You're firing under the round or under the first round. So it's not a perfect measurement, but it is an indication of what may be going on.
Right.
So also going to comment here in terms of last comment on shock buffs. Everybody loves them. Is these are CP, and I have probably about 2,000, maybe 3,000 rounds on that shock buffer, and it looks pretty new.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've run Wilson, I've run CPs, and the CPs seem to last a lot longer than the Wilsons do, just in terms of longevity. A lot of people hate these things because they claim that they fall apart and will gum up the gun and everything like that. I, being one that cleaned my gun every time that I shoot it, I am always looking at this thing and seeing what it's doing.
Got something else to say about the springs?
So last comment about springs. Now we're going to talk about magazines.
Well, you are.
Yeah. Okay. You can talk about something else. My two combinations for magazines is I start with an STI tube pretty much always. You can use SVI, but I use STI. In terms of springs, this is a Bevan Graham's follower spring combination, which results in 20 rounds in the gun.
Reloadable 20
Reloadable
rounds.
20 rounds. And then I really like the Dawson +1 base pads, not the SNL, because I don't feel like SNL stands for sometimes not legal. And again, in limited division, that you have 140 millimeters plus, I think 1.25 tolerance slop or whatever in the gauge. So I prefer not to take a chance on the base pads. But at any rate, these are the Dawson base pads. My other combination is the ISMI magazine spring and a Dawson follower, which is 19 rounds reloadable. And now you can talk about springs.
I don't really have anything else to say about springs. I use full power mainsprings in all my 1911s, 23 pounders, and I have never had any ignition problems regardless of the type of primer I use. And I do any kind of tuning, action tuning with the recoil spring. As far as mags are concerned, any single stack 45 mags I'm using are all from Checkmate Industries. There's a lot of single stack mags on the market. People will generally advocate the magazines that work for them, and that's perfectly reasonable. If your gun, for some reason, it doesn't work with the factory mags, and you buy an aftermarket mag from Chip McCormick or Wilson Combat or Trip or any of the Metal Form, any of those companies, and your gun runs with one brand and it doesn't run with another, use the ones that work.
Right.
I've never had, I think the 1911 style pistol has over the last 10 or 15 years especially, gotten a reputation for being kind of a finicky functioning gun. And the fact that one mag will work in one gun and not another is just indicative of the variety of tolerances and dimensions and whatnot that you see in this 1911 design that isn't really it's not a fixed object. It's more like it looks like a 1911, but that doesn't mean it's made to spec. So shop for the mags that work. I've essentially retired. My mags are made by anybody but Checkmate. I think they're the best on the market. But for many, many years, I used the Chip McCormick Power 10s and Power 8s. Had perfect service from them. And other people will be just as enthusiastic about the Wilson 47D and various mags on the market. So if you're shooting a single stack 1911 and it's not working and you think it's a mag problem, a mag change might fix it. But that's your deal with the single stack mags.
But notice on your gun, very similar to mine in terms of the mag release button, is that neither of us run the big gigantic paddle that you could put on there in terms of a mag release. I do not like that from the standpoint of I've gotten used to basically just doing a reload. I shift my grip like that in terms of doing reloads. My biggest fear is accidentally touching that thing in terms of my grip on the gun, or worse yet, the loaded gun laying on table start where it's laying like this. You come down, you hit the gun's laying on the table, it hits that mag release, pushes it in, dumps your mag out, the first thing you do before getting going. So I think what I've done in this mag release, I believe, however, I wouldn't swear to it on a Bible, that I think I cut a coil or maybe 1.5 or 2 coils off the mag release just to lighten it up a little bit in terms of being able to hit it quickly.
I bought a big oversized button, put it on the mag release on one of my guns, and I shoot 3 or 4 different guns in competition. And I don't have any trouble reaching the mag release with my index finger since I'm a lefty. And what I discovered is that having the big button on one gun kind of got me lazy. And what happened is it didn't help me find the button on the gun that had the button, but it made me miss the button on the guns that didn't have it. I didn't have to be as precise about getting the tip of my finger right on that button. And so in order to, either I guess would have to put an oversized button on every gun or just not put an oversized button on any of them. And so all my guns I'm running standard length. A lot of guns, Kimbers, for instance, come stock with a button that's of standard diameter, but it's extended out from the frame a little bit further. And I think if you're right-handed, you can probably get your right thumb on that a little bit easier. It extends out a little bit closer to your thumb. For me, doesn't make any difference because the button is just right there. But a lot of 1911s on the market have this slightly extended button that's still of standard size.
Yeah, I think I was going to comment here. The other thing that usually the friend of the shock buffer in terms of controversy is the full-length guide rod.
Oh, the full-length guide
Yeah.
rod.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the STIs normally come with something called a recoil master. You can't really see it what I've done here, but I've replaced the recoil master with a standard steel full-length one-piece guide rod. And I at one point played around with a tungsten guide rod in this just to add weight, but this gun has so much weight in the front end of the gun with a full-length slide and full-length dust cover that I eventually ended up taking it out and just running a standard one-piece full-length guide rod. A lot of people like to complain about how difficult it is
They
to take.
like to complain, or they just they have
I
complained.
think they like to complain, to be honest, about how difficult it is to take down a gun with a full-length guide rod. All I got to do is I pop the slide stop out.
How are you going to get the bushing off?
Well, I don't have a bushing because I have a bull barrel. But if I did want to take this out, you can't really see it here, but there's a hole that's drilled in the guide rod. So all I do is I take a paper clip, stick it in that, and then I can pull the whole entire assembly out. Pull the barrel.
Where do you keep your paper clip, Steve?
Well, where do you keep your bushing wrench, Rick?
My range bag. We already covered
Yeah,
that.
and that's where I keep my paper clip. So,
I tried.
At any rate, it's very easy to take this down with a one-piece full-length guide rod, assuming it's drilled.
So now this
to
is
be taken down.
this is the guide rod that God and John Browning intended. If it's just about an inch long inside the frame, it doesn't extend out. And the advantage in this gun is actually used primarily for IDPA, Custom Defensive Pistol Division, where the gun has to make a weight limit of 42 ounces. And the guide rod adds about 2 ounces of weight relative to the standard GI-style guide rod. And one of the ways that if you want to add a mag well and some additional features that increase the weight of the gun, you can pull that weight back a little bit by using the standard GI guide rod. And an all-steel gun, I don't know that you need an extra 2 ounces of weight hanging out there in the front.
Did God or John Moses Browning
No.
design that beaver?
No, he did not.
He did. So that was after he designed it.
I don't know who came up with that. That I don't know.
Certainly not the same guy who designed the full-length guide
Mr.
rod, but they were
Beaver.
both
Mr. Beaver came up with that.
Okay, yeah. And what about that Commander hammer? Did Browning come up with that?
No, Commander Colt did.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
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 And what about the funnel, the magwell funnel?
That
Not
was,
Browning either, right?
No.
No. Yeah. So there's been a lot of changes to
There
the
have
gun.
been. You could say there's been a few changes.
Yeah, including the full-length guide
Some,
rod.
some of them an improvement, some
Right,
of them not
right.
necessarily.
The other thing I've also done on this, and I talked about this before in the past, but I've basically modified my slide lock or slide release, whatever you want to call it, to not lock the slide back. So stick the magazine in. And that's one of the other modifications that has been done to the gun. And you'll pretty much note that anybody who's running limited has done that modification to their guns.
Except me.
Except, yeah.
'Cause my gun runs whether they disable it or not, so I just figured.
Okay.
So the purpose of that, though, why do you disable it?
Well, for two reasons. The first one and primary is that you don't, if the slide is locked back, and in these particular magazines, if I shove the magazine way up, there's a chance that I may end up hitting the tip of the ejector and busting that off.
Okay.
That's probably the biggest reason for doing it. The other reason is that with these particular magazines, because of the double stack design and the follower, that if you don't do that, you'll actually lock the slide back on with one round left in the magazine, which you don't want to do. So the idea is to disable everything. So I've modified to a certain degree the follower. I've also, in this case, the Bevan follower, I had to do that on my Dawson. I did not need to modify it. And then I modify the slide release. So basically this will not lock the slide back.
Now, if we go into the kind of ultimate enhancements, we just kind of steer our way into the open category. This is a SV open gun, 38 Super. Actually, this one's 38 Super Comp, which is a rimless version of the 38 Super. This gun has been pretty much tricked out from top to bottom. We've got our modular frame, similar to on Steve's gun, but this is an SV version. We've got the slide that's been ventilated here in the recoil spring tunnel. We've got our compensator, 3 ports on top, 1 port on either side. Our Seymour Serendipity red dot sight, our ultralight hammer, our beaver tail grip safety, our ambidextrous thumb safety, our trigger with interchangeable faces. You can go to a flat front, a short, a long, a medium. We've got our big magwell on here. The grip has got some custom stippling on it. All this stuff on this gun is pretty much what you'll find in limited division, other than the sighting and the comp. I mean, it's as tricked out as it is. It's really not that much different from Steve's gun. You'll see here that the difference of the short dust cover and the stirrup cuts on the front of the slide compared to Steve's gun that's got the full-length heavy dust cover and the bull slide on it. That's just a matter of preference. Where do you want your weight? You can move the weight around the gun. This gun obviously has been lightened in the slide a little bit to make up for the extra weight of the comp that's out here in front.
I think the other thing is that in open division, slide velocity is a lot more critical in open than it is in limited.
Yeah.
So there's a generally effort to try and lighten or make the slide go as fast as possible.
Well, and there's just a lot of other concerns too. Like you've got to make sure that your ejected brass on an iron-sighted gun, it can come out anywhere from vertical out to the side. On an open gun like this, you got to be concerned with your brass hitting the scope mount, and so you've got to tune the ejection not just in terms of you want the slide speed and the ejection angle to be compatible with your optics. So there's a number of different considerations there, but this is kind of as tricked out as it gets. You'll see variations on this, ports, hybrid compensators, which actually drill holes right into the barrel itself, additional slide lightening. You'll see guns with shorter slides. Just all these different little tweaks that maybe are preferential for one person, and somebody else will shoot the same gun and go, "Oh man, I hate that." So these guns are really tuned, for the individual. And another thing I noticed that we seem to have is,
I was just going to comment on that, is that we've all disabled our grip safeties.
grip safeties. This is actually the only pistol that I own with an active grip safety, because something about the wide body frame and the flat mainspring housing, which I don't like in a single stack gun, actually allows my hand to properly engage or disengage the grip safety on the high cap. That just absolutely does not work on a single stack. And in USPSA competition, that is perfectly legal to disable that. It's usually referred to as pinning it in place. In the old days, they would literally drill a hole through the frame or through the mainspring housing and install a steel pin that would hold the grip safety down, and that verb has stuck. I usually use a cut-up shock buff,
which is what I've done on this,
that I wedge in between the mainspring housing and the grip safety, just hold it in the depressed position.
For those of you who asked, how do you do that?
Consult a lawyer.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, there's concern about liability at disabling a safety device.
Right.
But if you look around at a USPSA match, you'll find that 50% to 90% of the shooters have disabled it. The reason being, I think, is that depending on how you grip the gun, not all gripping styles will consistently depress that. And the only thing worse than a gun that goes off when you don't want it to is one that doesn't go off when you do want it to.
Yeah.
So, and there's a ton of different grip safeties too. Steve and I have the STI grip safety that's got these, what they call it, like a knuckle relief or something. It's narrowed a little bit here to provide clearance for your thumb for an ultra high hold. This is the Ed Brown beaver tail that's got what they refer to as memory grooves on the raised pad here. This is a Wilson Combat beaver tail. Similar design, not quite as high, but it's. I like the shape of it. I like the way it's integrated into the gun. This is the standard Kimber grip safety. These, I think, all use the .250 inch radius cut. If you look at the popular grip safeties on the market, if the gun is not cut for a grip safety already, you have to cut it on a .25 inch radius.
Unless it's Springfield.
Unless it's a Springfield, and I think they use the Wilson
.22
cut. Oh, that's the S&A grip safety made for Springfield.
Right.
But yeah, the .25 cut is the popular one, and just about everybody now puts this in large pad at the bottom to help depress it.
Known as a speed bump, typically.
Speed bump, yeah. And what else we got here? What other interesting little doohickeys? This gun I have. I mentioned that I have metal checkering on the 6-inch gun. That's actual checkering cut right into the surface of the metal. I think this is the popular sizes or coarseness is 20 lines per inch, 30 lines per inch, and now 25 lines per inch has become popular. This gun has got what is popularly referred to as skateboard tape. It's this is actually a 3M product that's designed for traction on stairs. It comes in rolls. It comes in pre-cut strips. You just peel it off and stick it on there. It's not as pretty as checkering, but boy, is it cheap, and it provides a really good hold. I see people putting it on their slides. They put it on this pad. They put it on their grips. They put it all over the gun, even on mags to provide grip. Easy to cut out with an X-Acto knife or a razor blade. Just a really nice addition. Anywhere you want to improve the grip on the gun, any part of the gun, it's really nice. It's very durable. On one of my other guns, I've had the same piece on there for 3 or 4 years, and so this is good stuff. And it's one of those nice do-it-yourself deals. What else do we have here? What other cool stuff do we have?
Who makes your magazines?
What's that?
Who makes your magazines?
This is a Para Ordnance mag. Even though the gun is a Springfield Armory, it uses the Para magazines. So these are actual Para factory tubes with the same Dawson base pads that Steve uses, although these have followers that I believe are factory followers that are modified by grams and allow an extra round to fit in the mag using the standard magazine springs. This is a Para factory spring in here, and it results in a reloadable 18-round mag.
It's not bad.
I doubt that the springs have much service life. I mean, I haven't shot the gun enough yet to determine that, but with a spring that's intended for a 14-round mag, accommodating 8 rounds with the additional length, I suspect the mag springs aren't going to last very long. So maybe I'll have a chance to change to ISMI magazine springs.
Yeah.
Boy, what other neat stuff do we have? Now, this is the biggest single stack magwell in the world. You can use it for oil changes and stuff if you get tired of shooting this.
I think Dawson recently has come out with a single stack magazine that I don't know if it's as big as that, but
yeah, I mean this is as big as you can get and fit in the box.
Yeah, right.
I mean that's the key to this. Is that
well,
this
I would
will fit
imagine
in the
they
box.
would have come out with something similar. Why would they make a magwell that wouldn't be legal?
Yeah, well, prior to the invention of single stack, you didn't have to worry about it.
Right.
If you were using it for limited 10, the external dimensions didn't really matter.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But that's just about all the little tweaking and stuff. If you guys have any questions about this, why do we do it? What did we change? Why did we change it?
Or the effect of something changing?
Yeah, what's the effect?
Or whatever.
Yeah. Send us an email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com, or of course you can also send apply comments right at the website.
Right. Powerfactorshow.com.
Exactly.
And if you'd be so inclined to contribute to the program, there's a donate button also on the main webpage that you may do that. And
if you want to see Steve with a cool microphone like I do, send us a couple of bucks. I think most of the comments we've gotten on the show was not as much about content as about the varying audio quality. So,
which we're working on.
Yeah. So if you want Steve to have a cool mic like mine, just hit that button and send us
But until then,
$150.
I'm not using that. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
All right.